All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Give me 1 minute here to kick us live on Instagram. Usually takes a couple seconds to kick over here. There it goes. All right, we are good. So, welcome everybody. I am excited to have you here with us today. Whether you are watching this live or you're watching this recorded, I always appreciate that you are taking time out of your day to be part of this conversation and hear what we have to say. I am the guest that I have. I've known for some time now, and we've been getting to know each other through a group that we belong to, and have talked about having one of these conversations, and had just not been able to sync up schedules and get it on the calendar. So I'm really looking forward to that. We'll have Chris introduce himself in a minute. Just a reminder to folks that have been on these before, and information to those who haven't. Sometimes the comments don't feed over, or they feed over, but we're very engaged in the conversation. We don't necessarily see the comment come through. Please know that we will be going on to the platforms after our chat, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., and checking to see where there may be any comments or questions that were left. This will stay up live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Instagram pulls it down. So if you do have any comments or questions that we don't get to while we're on the call, please do feel free to shoot us a message afterwards. And with all of that now behind us, I'm excited to introduce Chris Roberts. He's going to tell you about who he is and what he does, and then we'll chat. So go ahead, Chris, introduce yourself.
Well, Deb, thanks for having me. It's you do a great job with these interviews, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you, and also congratulations on surpassing 100,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Thank you.
I think you're coming up on 200 now. So
I am. Yeah, I'm very excited.
It's amazing. So congratulations. I'm humbled and honored to be here. So thank you. And my name is Chris Roberts. I am a class action attorney. I practice nationwide, but where I'm located is St. Louis, Missouri. And what I do is I help people, primarily consumers, use little known laws to fight back against businesses that don't play by the rules. That can be in a variety of contexts. It can be fighting back against annoying telemarketers that call or text your phone without your permission, which I think a lot of us can relate to. It can be insurance companies shortchanging you on claims. It can be debt collectors. It can be a variety of areas. But what I really pride myself on is having clients come to me with a problem it's usually an annoyance or a nuisance or something that's just bugging them. They think there's no way out. And we turn the tables to not only fix the problem, but put money in their pocket. And so I'm excited to talk about class actions today. It's basically all I do. I've been doing it for a decade. And I look forward to hopefully educating about the class action process and answering any questions that you have.
Excellent. And I mean, I have had the benefit of having conversations with you before and being able to ask some questions, some of which I'll re-ask because I think it'll be helpful for people to hear, and some information that I'm sure I'm going to be learning for the first time, because I think that as with any profession, we all have kind of perceptions of what we think that looks like behind the desk. And I think specifically with lawyers, class action attorneys in general, there are some misconceptions. And we chatted briefly before we hopped on live here about that. I'd love for you to share a couple of those, because I know, and again, some of this we had talked about, and I didn't necessarily have a negative association with the things you were mentioning, but you were definitely educating me in terms of how that all works. So maybe you could talk about some of those misunderstandings and the logic behind them to help people understand class action law in general.
Sure. And the favorite criticism of class action lawsuits, and particularly class action lawyers, is these people just get all the money, and then if I'm part of the class and I get a settlement, I get a check for $1 or $2. So you have to step back and look at what is a class action and what is the purpose of a class action. So a class action is a single lawsuit, and it's usually for smaller dollar amounts of claims where usually a consumer, sometimes a business, but they are harmed in the same way. So there might be 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million people that are harmed in the same way, but maybe they're only harmed $100, $200, $300. Well, is an individual going to file a lawsuit over $100, $200, $300? Will a lawyer take that case? No, because the filing fee for the lawsuit and serving the lawsuit alone is going to cost more than that. So what is the appropriate mechanism to change a business's conduct? That's a class action, because what happens then is those $100, $200, $300 claims are multiplied by hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and it can help effectuate change, because a company could settle with an individual for $300-400, maybe even a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it may not change their conduct because they may be profiting so much off of that practice. So you've got to keep that in mind. And here's why it's important to keep that in mind. If you have a lawyer, traditional case, personal injury case, for example, or any other type of case, that lawyer is usually going to handle that case on what we call contingency fee basis. That means the lawyer will not get paid unless you recover something. So going back to our example, let's say that you had a claim for $100 and you had a contingency fee with the lawyer for 40%, which is standard, 33% to 40. That means if you won your case, the lawyer would get $40 and you would get 60. Okay. Well, in a class action, the lawyer is not only representing you, they're representing hundreds or thousands of tens of thousands of people for these smaller dollar claims. And so when you look at the lawyer's fee compared to the individual settlement payment, the class member might get 50 or $100, sometimes less, depending on the case. And the lawyer could potentially get hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. But that's because the lawyer is not only helping you individually, they're helping all of these people. And so what the court says is that the lawyers are entitled to a percentage generally of what they've allowed the class members to recover, or they've given them the right to recover. And what's interesting, and this is where I like to talk about the criticism, is statistically that percentage of what the courts award is actually less than what the lawyer would charge in a typical contingency fee basis. The average amount is usually around 28 to 30%, and the average amount for an individual case is 33 to 40%. And so that's the biggest criticism. But a lot of times people just don't understand what the role of the lawyers in these cases, and the fact that the dollar claims are not very large, and that's how these settlements come to be.
Yeah, and all the effort that you're putting forth to it too, right? Like, I think sometimes people think that, like, all you're doing as the lawyer is getting people to say, "Yes, that happened to me." And then you tell the company, "Hey, all these people say something's wrong." And the company automatically says, "Oh, okay, I'll give you this money." I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, which when you read a lot, if sometimes you'll get an email in the an email or a letter in the mail saying, "Hey, there's a potential case here," and it's all of that, the information and what you need to know. That's all being produced by the person or people, firm sometimes, right, that's representing a particular case. There's a lot of work that goes into that, like you said. So you have to be incentivized because, like everybody else, that's how you make your living.
And that's exactly right. I can give you just a very brief story about this. We had a case about 7-8 years ago that we had prevailed on every step of the way. And then there was an appeal taken from that case. And we're a two-person law firm, my law partner and I. And so, we pride ourselves on being able to take on these big companies and be successful. But at the same time, that means that our time and resources are much more valuable than if you're like some mega firm. Not that they're not valuable, but it has a greater impact on us. So we had prevailed. We had spent almost $200,000 on costs through experts, depositions, things like that. We put over $1 million, probably $2 million of time into that case, and we lost the case on appeal. So we worked all that time and got nothing out of it. So that can happen. There can be cases too that settle quickly, but it does account for the risk and the fact that we're not getting paid unless the consumer gets paid. And so
Right.
that's a really important point.
Yeah, and I want to, because there was a piece to this, and in talking about the fees, and I think the fees get it. Sometimes the attack on the fees is because there's a greater misunderstanding of legal system and lawyers in general, and obviously, like any occupation, there are people that aren't nice and do unkind things and don't do justice to their role. And so certainly we could cite people that are lawyers in any field of law that have done not nice things, right? So not to kind of take out that component of it, but that your role, right, especially you, right, because I know you, so I have the added benefit of that, but your role is trying to right wrongs, give people validation. So sometimes you're right, you as the recipient, because you were the victim in the case, maybe you're only going to get $50 from it, but there is a vindication and a validation that comes from this person did something or this company did something, and now somebody's acknowledging it in a way that's saying to this company, you can't continue to do that, right?
That's
That's the bigger picture. Go ahead.
That's absolutely correct. And in fact, like that's the one thing that we have discussions about with clients is that, look, this is not a case that you're going to retire on or get rich on. Like that's not the purpose. It serves a bigger purpose here. The other thing too to note about these settlements that a lot of people don't understand is that in a typical case, like a personal injury case, if we had a case and we were on the opposite side of each other, we could just settle the case. Once the case settles, we just dismiss it. That's not the case in a class action. Class action, the court actually has to review the settlement agreement and approve that settlement agreement, not once, but on two separate occasions. And so not only do you have kind of a lower fee, but you also have the court being a gatekeeper on two separate occasions to make sure that that settlement is fair and appropriate for the class members.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, the process itself, right? I only know what I know from conversations with you and from sometimes like I'll read when those things come in the mail to kind of see what is this for, what happened,
Yep.
is this something that I want to get involved in? And I think, as we noted, there are certainly instances where it might be the firm may have motives that aren't necessarily pure and upright, right? They may not be able to, they might not be seeking to right or wrong, but in your case, and I think in general, that's the norm, right? You go into class action law because you want to help people live by certain standards and make sure that they're, like you said, play by the rules. And I think like that's such a great phrase because we all get that. We want people to do what they're supposed to be doing and doing the right thing. And in being a class action attorney, even in your interactions with the company, I know that for you, it's not about being nasty, right? It's about being really clear and articulate and collaborating and saying to the company, here's what we found. Like, what can we do to fix this, right? Those
Right.
negotiations aren't about sticking it to anybody. It's about rectifying a wrong and finding a common place where everybody can come out of the situation acknowledging that the situation took place and this is what we're going to do moving forward, right? You can be kind.
Oh, that's exactly right. And I think that is something that unfortunately a lot of lawyers in this profession miss is that you can get better results by building a relationship, building a rapport, having a very friendly relationship with the opposing counsel. It's kind of like this old saying that you attract more flies with sugar than vinegar, because ultimately your adversary is the one that's talking to their client about yes or no, we should settle this case. And if we should, how much should we be settling it for?
Right.
If you're a complete jerk to the opposing counsel, you're completely unreasonable, you don't work with them on things, you don't accommodate things that maybe pop up with family, things like this, then they're less likely to help you work collaboratively to achieve a solution that's good for all. And so unfortunately people miss that in the profession, but that's something our firm really prides itself on, is thinking about these cases practically about can they be resolved, do they need to be tried, and also treating people professionally in the right way and building those relationships to get better results for our clients.
Yeah, I imagine you could probably teach a master class from the number of times you've had to have some of those difficult conversations on conflict resolution and negotiation, right? So I was a teacher, so my master's degree, we had to take a lot of courses that had to do with conflict resolution and negotiating. Obviously, with a student, negotiating is kind of a term you don't usually use, but having a hard conversation to help somebody understand something they didn't previously understand and arrive at a common ground. That's negotiation. We do
Right.
that on a daily basis when we communicate with people and we compromise. This is what I want. This is what I want. Okay, where can we kind of do that? And the benefits of, as you said, doing it in a way that de-escalates the emotions, even though the emotions are real, and kind of saying like, here's where I'm at. Let me hear where you're at, and how do we move forward? Do you feel like that was something you were just good at in general? Because I don't know that I think that everybody has a gift for being able to be calm and collected and nice when dealing with conflict resolution and negotiations.
It takes practice, and I work on it every day. I think the most important thing, and that is the hardest thing, and maybe this is probably not just for myself, but everybody, is that sometimes we have a tendency to just want to say what we think instead of shutting up and listening to what the other
Mm,
person's telling us. By being quiet and listening to the other side's concerns, their views on the case, things like that, you can help strengthen your own position, but you can also maybe identify weaknesses in your positions that, you know what, maybe we give a little bit here because, you know, they might be right on this point, or that what they're saying, it has some merit. The biggest thing, and it's not a skill I think that I was born with, but just like learning from other lawyers, especially my law partner, over time, is listening, letting people talk, letting them kind of, you know, show their hand, so to speak, can be a very, very effective tool in negotiation, because you better have a better understanding of what their concerns are. And this is a collaborative, I mean, we're adversaries, but at the end of the day, it is somewhat of a collaborative approach here. It's right. Like, you want to be able to let the other side look like a hero to their client too. Right. And so you've got to think of a way that's a win-win. And that's something that I really take a lot of pride in. I think it's really important to getting good results for clients.
Yeah, I have so many things. So I want to talk a little bit more about this. And then I do want to make sure we talk about telemarketing, because I know that a lot of people are going to want to hear about that.
Yeah.
And just in general, how you kind of come upon some of these cases, and ways that you approach, how you find them or how they're brought to you. But, you know, on that note, I think it's really powerful the way you said that with the listening piece, because I think that everybody benefits from that in their daily life in terms of being an effective communicator, is that component of listening. And it's hard. Right. And when you were talking about working with, you know, you called it the adversary, because certainly in a case that person's considered by role your adversary, whether they're your adversary outside of that or not. And there would be times where I would be working with a client, and we would be working with a vendor who maybe didn't deliver on what they were supposed to deliver on. And so it comes time to pay the invoice, or it comes time to whether we're going to renew the contract, or whether we're saying this contract needs to end because the vendor's not delivering. And I think there's this tendency to want to, like you said, kind of march in with this, here's all the things you did wrong, and this is what we're doing, as opposed to kind of walking into the conversation with, we're feeling some frustration. Can you maybe talk to us about why you think we might be feeling frustration? And
Right.
letting the person speak and letting that person share that, which serves the purpose of, number one, stopping it from going into immediate like aggression mode, right? Because once you attack, that the other person's going to feel that. But it also, like you said, you learn so much in hearing what the person has to say. It gives you a better entry point for resolution and collaboration. And it's helpful also to think about it from the other perspective as you're driving your decisions. So I think that's, yeah, powerful.
Listen, the most difficult, without question, negotiations that I've been a part of are when the other side is emotional. Like, and so sometimes you'll have a mediation or whatnot, and half of the mediation is spent on taking that emotion out of the equation and focusing on making this a business decision that works well for both. That can be the most difficult thing. I mean, it creates problems because people just fail to see kind of the logic of certain things. And so by de-escalating, you can get really great results. Just listening. They're emotional, taking that, you know what, I understand your concern. Here's what we think is fair to address that concern. Can you work with us on this? Here's our proposal. Tell me what you think is wrong with this proposal. Putting the ball in their court, having that make them feel like they've solved the problem, not you.
Yeah.
That can be a very effective strategy in taking emotion out and getting good results.
I love it. I love it. So let's talk about the telemarketing piece, because I know. So I'm going to, because we talked about this in person and I said this specific thing to you. So I remember, I mean, obviously in the days before cell phones, right? And you didn't have to worry about text messages and getting emails in your hand and all of those things. There was telemarketing, there was phone calls. And then at some point came this beautiful thing called the do not call list, right? Which everybody was super excited about. Like, how do I get myself on this do not call list? And how do I make sure? And if somebody calls me, I can be like, I'm on the do not call list. So there was, it was like, there was almost this palpable excitement of people feeling like they were gaining a little bit of power back. Like, I can keep all these people from calling me and selling these different things. And obviously there were some guidelines to it. And then, all of a sudden we're now, so there's like obviously a huge time since the do not call list was invented. But I mean, I'm constantly getting phone calls, text messages, some of it spam to try to get me to do something that's going to take down my computer or phone data. But what happened to the do not call list? Like, where did it go?
It's still alive and well. And so it's still alive and well. And so number one, to address some of the issues that you raised, check to see if you're on the do not call list. And just so the website is donotcall.gov. You go in there, you can verify it. If you're not, then all you do is put your phone number on the list. It literally takes 15, 20 seconds, a very easy process. Where is the do not call list? It's still there, but the problem is not that it's there, it's that unfortunately a lot of these telemarketers don't abide by not calling, by not calling people who are on that list. And so here's what the law can do to help people fight back. And this is really interesting because a lot of people don't even know it exists. But if your number's on the do not call list, and there's other ways you can use this law too, we can talk about, but if your number's on the do not call list and it's been on that list for over a month, and you can also check that at donotcall.gov to see exactly when you registered it. If you get telemarketing calls or texts and you haven't given your permission, or you don't have what's called an established business relationship with that particular company, then you can use a little known law called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. We call it the TCPA, as a hammer to fight back against these telemarketers. And the hammer is that the penalty is up to $500 and up to $1,500 for every single call or text that are placed to you without your permission. And I've had clients have hundreds of calls. I've had clients with just a handful, but it can be a very powerful tool, especially in the class action context, because $500 times 1,000 calls, which is not that many, especially in a text message context. You can shoot out 1,000 text messages in a snap of your fingers. That is an incentive for businesses to play by the rules. And so that is a law not many people know about, but you can use to your advantage. And one thing I say is, like, what if at the mastermind, I said, imagine a world in which every time a telemarketer called you at dinner, they actually had to pay for your dinner. And that's what this law provides for, is that you get $500 up to $1,500 a call or text. And most importantly, it will help stop the calls to your phone. That's the most important goal here, right? Because the thing that hurts the business the most isn't you telling them stop calling me. The thing that hurts them the most is hitting them in their pocketbook, unfortunately. And people might not like that, but that's just kind of the way of the world.
Yeah, and there's some misunderstandings of that, right? So number one, obviously, you have to be on the do not call list. But secondly, are there any other? Let me let you finish, guys.
Kind of.
Okay.
If you get a call, okay, if you get what's called a pre-recorded voice or an artificial voice call, so it's not a live person on the other line, or it's an AI responding to you, it's kind of an unnatural conversation, you can pursue a case under this same law, the TCPA, even if you're not on the do not call list, if you have not provided what's called your prior express written consent to receive that call. Okay. So if you haven't signed something in writing, physically or digitally, saying this particular company can call me, and they place a robocall or an AI call to you, even if you're not on the DNC list, that can be a case. And again, you can get $500 to $1,500 for every call. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's a really
no, that's helpful,
because a lot like with the development of AI and whatnot, and how sophisticated it's getting so quickly, those types of calls are becoming much, much more prevalent. So people need to be aware that there is something that you can do to fight back against those calls too.
Well, and the other thing that I think, because I've caught myself sometimes almost doing that, and I've had like people that I know who've done this, and that they'll come to me and they'll go, well, this person's calling me. And then we talk through it, and like they signed up for something. Like, generally speaking, a lot of those boxes are by default checked. And the boxes that are by default checked when you sign up for, like, okay, I'm just going to make something up. I'm going to create a Facebook account. And then it has a little like, I agree. And you click in it, and in there it says to receive calls, emails, text, etc. So I'm using Facebook only because I think everybody's familiar with it. But you might be going on the Target website to order something, and you're signing up for text messages or whatever. If you're not unchecking that box, or you're not checking the box that says don't, right? Sometimes it's flipped and you have to check it. You're giving them permission. Then you get the call from, like, people are like, why is Target calling me? I never gave Target permission. And I'm like, well, you did, because you signed up for this account and you checked the box that said, I agree to receive emails, text, and phone calls. So it's also making good consumer choices in advance to prevent that. But I didn't realize that with the AI, right, to what you just spoke about, like, that's a different thing. You're right, because it's not a person saying, "Can I talk to you?" You're not getting asked that question. They're just going in.
And the consent issues are the same. So, like in
Yeah.
your example, like if Target was placing an AI call and the
Oh,
person
sure.
had checked the box saying, we can call you. If you have consent, that's an absolute defense to a case like this. But
Yeah.
there's two really important points on this. Okay. Number one is that in a lot of the cases that I have, I'd say 95% of them, the first call I get from a defense lawyer is we have consent. Your client went on this obscure website that nobody in their right mind's ever heard of, and they consented. And they'll send me the information. The client's never been there. The IP address doesn't match up. Sometimes the demographics of the client don't match up. And what's happened is there's a big industry of lead generation. And there's some good lead generators, but there's a lot of bad ones too, that get leads that are not legitimate leads, create these and sell them over and over and over again. So,
Mm.
so there can be supposed consent, but in reality, no. Sometimes there is consent, but you just have to kind of see what each case provides for. Okay. But the
Interesting.
other thing to keep in mind that's really, really important, and this is an often missed point, is let's go back to your example of Target. Let's say they're sending you text messages about 20% off this weekend, right? Tell me, Deb, what does it usually say at the end of that text message that you get from Target?
Reply stop if I don't want to receive these.
Exactly. And the reason for that is they don't have to provide, it's a good practice to provide the consumer to opt out of those text messages. Or on a phone call, too, you should have that right as well. If the consumer does that, the business has an affirmative obligation to put that person on what's called their internal do not call list. Okay. So, as an example, if you text stop, sometimes you'll get a message back, a confirmatory text message that says you're opted out. And that's fine. That's great practice. I can't tell you how many cases I've handled where even after sending that confirmatory text message, the business continues to text a person. Okay. Those are great cases because number one, you don't have to be on the national do not call list for that claim because you're supposed to be on the internal do not call list. That's different than the national list. Okay. The national list is nationwide. You're telling everyone, don't call me. Internal is you're telling a specific company, don't call me. Same thing, $500 to $1,500 a text. Now, the $1,500 a text, that applies if it's what's determined to be a willful violation, meaning the company knew or had reason to know they shouldn't be communicating with you. Well, what's better than a company texting you after you've said stop and after they've already said, we'll stop texting you? So those cases can be really, really, really good cases for consumers as well. And a lot of times they're computer glitches. Sometimes data is not transferred, things like that. But we've settled several cases on that issue. And so there's all sorts of ways that people can kind of fight back against these telemarketing practices, even in limited circumstances where they have initially consented to receive the call or text.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does make you, and you have to kind of be willing to, as the consumer, to take the time to pause and deal with it. I think a lot of us are like, I don't like this, but I don't necessarily want to deal with it. But if collectively, which is what a class action suit is, if collectively people come together and sign their name or agree to be part of that, it does help the practice, right? One or two people isn't necessarily going to make enough of a financial difference and isn't even really necessarily going to be worth pursuing. But when it becomes collective, that's how we affect change. So a lot of times people say, like, I wish I could change things. Working together, right? There's a reason why petitions, good old fashioned petitions, they've been around for years. A class action's kind of like a type of petition. It's a group of people saying, this happened, it wasn't okay, and I'm going to say it wasn't okay.
You raise a really important issue and actually another misconception about class action cases. And that is you only need one person to bring a class action.
Okay.
You only need a single person. So when we talk about people signing up or whatnot, what we're talking about is you only need one person to file the suit. But we're talking about is through the discovery process, we have learned other people that have been harmed in a similar way. And so those are the people, for example, in a class settlement that will receive things in the mail or the email, what we call class notice, a notice of a settlement. So those people, sometimes they have to sign up, like it's called a claims made settlement. Sometimes it's just it's a checks cut settlement where checks are cut to everyone, and you can opt out of the settlement if you want. But a lot of people think, oh, I got to get this big group of people to get a case
Okay.
going. You only need one. So like you only need one person that gets a telemarketing call or text, and they file a case saying, hey, ABC company, you sent similar calls or texts to hundreds or thousands of other people. And so we want to pursue this case as a class action. We've asked the court to allow us to do that. So that's where it comes in with the bigger group of people.
Gotcha.
But it's not as class action cases are difficult, but it's not as difficult as a lot of people think in terms of bringing the case, because a lot of people think, I got to get 30, 40, 50, 100 people. You just need
Sure.
one. You just need one person.
Well, you need one person with enough of a thing, right? Like if it was one person who only got one call, that wouldn't really be.
No, that could be a great case.
Oh,
Now,
really?
for the do not call, you need at least 2 calls or text. For the robocall, 1 call. So it just, if you have a single call case, that's an ideal case for a class action.
Interesting.
And so it doesn't have to be somebody with a huge dollar amount. Remember, we go back to what a class action is. It's usually small dollar claims. When I have people that get hundreds, I don't know about 1,000, but hundreds of calls, I typically don't file those cases as class actions. I typically file them as individual claims because the individual claim is so valuable.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, how do you ever go out and kind of look for actively kind of search for issues that might need somebody to kind of take up the case? And how do you go about doing that?
That's a great question. So, yes, I've got Google alerts for example, lawsuits that attorneys general are filing. I'll watch social media to see what people are complaining about, and see if there's potential class cases there. But a lot of it, like with the telemarketing, everybody gets these calls. So a lot of people are just reaching out. But we've even gone to, like, for example, in Missouri, we have a state court system where you can see all the lawsuits that are filed. And we did a lot of work, class action cases against debt collectors. And so we could actually look online and see everything the debt collectors were filing in these lawsuits. And if we found a mistake, because we know debt collection's a volume practice, they do the same thing over and over and over again. We found a mistake, we say, okay, that's a good class action case. Let's file it. And so it's just kind of keeping your eyes and ears open. And I always listen to ideas. It doesn't matter how crazy they are, because even a crazy idea can lead to something else that is in fact fruitful. So I always encourage people, hey, if you've got an idea, 95% of them aren't going to work, right? You've got to really vet these, but talk to me about it, because there can be something fruitful there. I'll give you an example. One attorney is an attorney. This is not it's not just somebody that has no practice in law, but they said, I got an idea for a class action, Chris. And they said, I want to file a class action against various TV stations. And I said, okay, well, what for? And I said, well, when there's against the weather people, because when there's a bad storm coming in, I feel like they always overstate the severity of the storm to increase their ratings. And I think that's very deceptive and misleading. It's like, well, yeah, it could be, but what's your out of pocket loss? Like, what's your damage? Things like that. And it seems kind of out there, but the point is to always listen to what people are talking about for potential cases. And that is a really good way to get ideas. Reddit is a great source. YouTube can be a great source. Just looking at consumer complaints in general about things, that's really the best way to have ideas, or look at. And sometimes you don't even reinvent the wheel. Maybe there was a case that settled in a different state that might work in yours. So sometimes it's creating things and coming up with creative ideas. Sometimes it's not reinventing the wheel. Sometimes it's just having people come to you and talk to you about things that they've experienced. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it goes back to that listening piece, right? Well, I just heard 2 pieces of wisdom, right? So a reiteration of the listen to people's ideas, listen to what people are saying, be paying attention, right? There's a lot of information that we can get by simply paying attention. But also on the speak side, the sharing the idea, like, okay, share it. So if it doesn't work, it's not going to work. As long as you're not necessarily announcing it out to a million people without kind of thinking it through, it's important to have somebody that you can bounce those ideas off. And hopefully it would be a trusted person that, has
Right.
the ability to kind of be discerning with you. So I think that was, that was exactly the information that I was looking for, is kind of how does that come about? I think there's obviously a lot of misconceptions and terms that people use to refer to that people that are out there, that class action attorneys are, chasing after, trying to find different things. But I mean, again, ultimately we have to take it back to, we certainly would not fault somebody who's in the, one of the rescue type roles, right? We wouldn't say like, oh, firemen are out there listening to hear about fires going on so that they can go fight the fire. We wouldn't be like, oh, look at them trying to chase fire, right?
Right.
I mean, in similar suit, what you're doing is you're trying to be aware of what's going on out there so that we can right the wrong, so that we can get people to play by the rules, and that there's accountability. Because unfortunately, the volume right now, particularly with telemarketing, the volume of some degree, I would say, egregious kind of just disregard for what is considered common courtesy can be addressed through this.
And I think you actually raise a really interesting point about, especially like your firefighters example. The thing that I really pride myself on too is not abandoning my common sense, because there are class action cases out there that honestly shouldn't be filed. And what happens is they get dismissed because they're so out there. And then what happens is a lot of times the business community runs with those cases and says, aha, look how terrible these cases are. Somebody filed a lawsuit over, the foot-long sandwiches at Subway, or somebody filed a suit against Starbucks claiming that the amount of liquid in the drink was misrepresented because they had put ice in the drink. I mean, things like this, you got to think of your common sense before filing the case. And so one thing that we try to do too is to look at these cases from a big picture perspective. Are they common sense cases? Are they actually harming people? Can we actually help people in bringing this case? So that, I think, is another important point that a lot of times some lawyers tend to miss.
Yeah, common sense and kindness, right? Both pieces of that. Like, is this worthwhile? And am I going to approach this in a way that's going to create conflict and tension and derision, or am I going to approach this in a way that helps there to be more accountability? So I love that. So
Right.
Before I have you share a final thought with everybody, which can be Chris wisdom, humor, whatever it is, wherever you want to head with that. Tell everybody how because I know a lot of people are like, first off, I'm sure everybody wrote down the do not call URL, but how do they get in touch with you? Either to have you weigh out a case for them, or just to be able to kind of watch. You do put out a lot of really great content on platforms. What are the
Sure.
platforms for people to follow you on?
Sure. My biggest followings on TikTok. We talk a lot about these types of cases, and kind of in a creative and fun way that people can relate to. And my handle's the Class Action Lawyer on TikTok. My website is classactionguru, GURU.com. And so people can literally through the website can schedule a Zoom meeting with me. You can email me. I'm not going to give you my email address because everyone misspells it, but those are the two best ways. And I'm always willing to talk to people. There's no charge to talk to people. I always happy to listen, and I'll give you my honest assessment. And that's another thing that I really pride myself on. It's like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'll tell you if it's a case or not. And if it's not, I'll tell you why. And just like a doctor, someone else might have a second opinion. I can even give you a recommendation for somebody else. And so that's kind of how I go about things generally.
Yeah, I love that. I attest to at least everything that I have witnessed thus far. You are on the up and up. I do love your TikTok. It makes me laugh. And obviously you've got some old content on there. I'll let people go and find it for themselves. That definitely makes me still chuckle every time. But yeah, you are definitely creative and you bring up a lot of great topics. And I'm always like, I catch your TikTok and I'm like, I wouldn't even thought about that as a topic. And here you are doing it with the chuckle. So I think that's fantastic. All right. Final thought that you have for everybody.
So the final thought is you can turn the tables against, and this is not just in the legal field and things in terms of the case we've been talking about, but like if you have something negative in your life, You have something that's getting you down, something that's annoying you, something that's frustrating you. Think hard, think creatively. There almost always is a solution. It might not be an easy solution to find, but there almost always is a solution if you put your mind to it, or if you get somebody that can help you find a solution to that. I think that's really important. And the reason I think that's important is because it goes to a lot of what we do and what we pride ourselves on is finding solutions to complex and novel issues. And so, like in terms of everything in life, I think people can do the same. Stay positive, don't get down, fight back, and be optimistic, and things can be great. And also, the last thing I would say is, and you're very big on this, is kindness and listening. I think we've talked about that a lot today. Those can get you a long way, whether that's in the practice of law, whether that's any business that you have, or just your everyday life. I think those are important things, important lessons that we can take with us, whatever our profession is or whatever our walk of life is.
Ooh, beautiful. One would, I didn't even, you didn't even prepare that. I mean, that was excellent. That was
Is that too deep?
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. Well, you know, that's the funny thing. You never know what angle somebody's going to take, where they're going to go with it. But I love it. And you reiterated all the things that I was thinking in my head were the takeaways, right? That here it is in an industry that maybe would be associated with more talking than listening. And you just really, everything that you talked about repeatedly kept coming back to listening to the person that's considering filing, listen to the person that's the defendant, listen to what's happening on social media and the culture, listen to the law, listen to your ideas, right? It's that really paying attention to other people and your own internal voice to bring about new things, and doing it all with kindness, which, as you know, we talked, right, is definitely something that I think is important. And I think that is absolutely why you're effective. I also think that's why your TikTok is so fun, because you can feel that there is no tone of aggression at all, even when you're talking about things that are being done wrong. It's really just about entertaining and educating people. So I really appreciate you doing this. This was a fun conversation.
Thank
I
you.
learned a little bit more. You reminded me. I remember you telling me previously about you only need one person, but the way I was saying it, I was making it sound like that's not the case. And I appreciate that you clarified that for everybody.
That's why we're here. We're here to learn from each other, and I've learned a lot from you and watching your videos and interviews. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Chris. And thank you, everybody, whether you joined us live, whether you're watching this recorded, we appreciate you. We're confident that you took something away from this conversation that's going to impact the way you think, feel, or do. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.